Hey, good morning, Ben here with Stew on the Lake. This is part 2 of the baby snowy owl. And it's still, obviously, out in the stuga. You remember that's how it started, with a big chunk of basswood. And Jordy, I got my bandsaw ordered if they just deliver it. And I'll be able to quit hacking these things out with a Sawzall. So he started there. There's kind of the pattern I went. I think that was a ceramic one, and it was kind of cutesy. And as usual, I start either with a reference or from my head, and then I don't even attempt to copy it. I try to stay somewhat true to form in the character, but then I give up. So when we left you on the last one, we had shaped this guy out. I'm using the new burner from PGL Enterprises. That's a dual. I like it. I don't know if it's not as hot as my original. On the settings, I'm running a little bit hotter, or if the pins, being newer, are just not the same. So I burn those. I mark the feathers in initially with a pencil, kind of get a flow, and I don't use a template. And the reason I don't use a template is I like them to look natural. Now, if you're doing a snake, like Mike over at Extended Sticks, you should go check Mike's channel out. Beautiful work that he's doing. But a snake has to have a fairly, I don't know what can't find a word here. They're symmetrical, and they're all relatively consistent, although they do change in size as they go down. A fish, if you're carving a fish, is relatively the same way. But a lot of these birds, the feathers are obviously overlapped, and you're just getting the tip or the side of a feather, and by very nature of them being movable, especially on the wings, they won't be uniform, and one will be sticking out and whatnot. So this is a baby owl, make-believe, not anatomically correct, as usual, not a competition piece. It's just a show you how to do an owl. I am going to do a big full-size snowy owl one of these days, but I think before I do that, I will do the great horned owl, and then somewhere in the middle, if I get that bandsaw going, I will do that raven that everybody's been asking about. But I kind of need a bandsaw for that because the layout's a little bit more complicated. So I burned the feathers in to keep get a little reference for the tip of that micro carver, and then I rounded them over, with a ruby bit. So one flows into the other. You can kind of see how they're starting to flow on there. And then I will come back and typically outline them once again, and each pass, probably 3 passes, is my norm on these. The first pass is to get the flow going right on the feathers and get the barbs and the quills in, and then the second, I'll take it off with a wire brush, and then the second pass does a little bit more detail, and again, take a little bit of the carbon off with a wire brush. And then the last thing that I'll do is the touch-up, and that usually includes a little bit of undercutting. I might even ruin some of the burning by grabbing a micro power carver with a ruby bit in it, and have to burn again. So I'm burning the quills in the middle, and I'm trying to feather it from where it comes under the feather. The top would be obviously wider, and it goes down to practically nothing at the tip, and I'm trying to do that, but I don't have to get real precise, other than if when I'm starting to lay this out on the right hand pass coming down, I'll tilt the pen slightly to the right, and on the left hand pass I'll tilt it back to the left. Now here's a diamond ball bit or sphere, and I'm just kind of re-rounding and leaving the nib alone. I'm touching it a little bit on occasion there, but I'm just trying to get it so I don't have a definitive line in the middle there, so that sticks up a little bit. Now you can see those are not uniform, but if you look at that first pass on the left hand side of that feather that I'm doing right now, and this is actual real time, I can go up and touch the edge of that nib with the side of the pen or as I'm up in there, and I can get a perfect line coming down. So I don't have to, when I cut those nibs in, I don't have to cut them perfect on that. People have commented on the burning that it looks like it's very tedious and takes a lot of patience, but I equate it kind of like, I guess, I find solitaire to be boring. People will sit and play solitaire for hours, and it's the repetitive motion, I think, of that. I don't have a TV going in the background here. When I had the studio, I'll probably put a TV out here, but I like the background noise. Mindless television, something like Star Trek or any of the older sitcom shows where you really don't have to pay attention to it and you kind of get what's going on in the background. So you can see I kind of did an undercut, and I'm doing just the left side of these feathers on the burn. And if you read up on people that are burning feathers, they'll tell you that they do 5,000 lines per inch in there. And quite frankly, I don't know how you'd get 5,000 lines in there. I've never bothered to sit down and or count how many lines per inch. I think you'd be really hard pressed to be more than 100. Just guessing. I might go back and count these one of these days just to see how many, but you just can't get a fine enough line in there to do that. So I will come down on each of these feathers and I'll burn one side, and I let it kind of run at the tip of it down into the next feather. But when I'm up in, this one doesn't have that because it's not laying under a feather just yet. But when it lays under a feather, like the one right below the pin there, I will cut a little bit deeper when I'm up underneath that feather, because the one below is coming out from under, if that makes sense. Hey, there's a bunch of new, this one goes through a lot of the burning. I'm going to show you how to set the eyes. And then at the end, I've got a preview kind of the third video, which is going to be the bird basically complete from all the burning and putting the claws in and shaping the rock and that sort of stuff. And I haven't decided. I filmed a little bit of the painting because you guys keep asking for it, and I'm not sure if I'm going to put that in or not. We'll have to see, because I haven't started editing that. I've been pretty busy here lately, and I am back down in Iowa this week, so my time is short. So you can see there I'm kind of feathering off that. I'm starting on the right side of those now, and you can see how the nib was left up in the air. This pen doesn't get hot. I could burn for hours with this pen. You'll see that there's two of them. I think the red is the normal use pen that comes from PJL Enterprises. These are fixed tips. You can have them sent back in a year or two when you're done, and he'll put any tip in there, re-solder it, silver solder it in the end, and use the pen body, and he'll put on a new foam deal there. But those pens really don't get hot, and this is the heavy duty one. Kind of counterintuitive. If the blue one is the heavy duty one and the red is the normal, I would think, just in my pea brain, that red would be heavy duty, being hotter than the other. Of course, not everybody thinks the same, and brains work in weird ways. Other people would say, well, it's obvious the red one is hotter, and the blue one is going to be cooler. Too deep. It's kind of like if you jump in your car and accelerate to the speed of light, turn on the headlights. Will they work? And more importantly, can you see them? Too deep for me. So you can see here's what I was talking about. I'm burning heavy and deep up underneath the one feather, and then they kind of come back on out from underneath. So brass brush, you can use a steel brush. It doesn't really matter. They both seem to work the same, and they're relatively cheap. It's a small brass brush. You can get at any type of auto store or whatever. It tends to have them more. So there you can see what the burning does. So the update on that handpiece. that I've got there. That's an iCube from Ram, and it's I'm going to take a stab, $275, I think, and it comes with the handpiece. And then that's a $15 cuts-all. It's not an extreme cuts-all. And the 2 cuts-all bits, if you go back, that I ordered to do this, and I don't use extremes. Jordy uses extremes, but he runs them in a Fordham, which can handle them. And this handpiece, the extreme, is a little bit too aggressive for the handpiece. So, and speaking of, go over and check Jordy Johnson out. He's got a new intro, and it's a pretty cool professional intro. So, well done, Jordy. And like I said, I did order my bandsaw, and it's going to take a couple weeks, I guess, maybe a month. It gets to come truck freight and set it up, and then I'll get some. Let me know what sizes of basswood you want, Jordy. I forget now. I think you said 8-inch by 2 or 3 inch. I don't remember. But let me know, and I'll test out this new bandsaw with I got a couple resaw blades coming. So on the owl, I'm contouring down into the eyes. Owls are a little bit tricky when you're doing the face. I think the beak is a little bit long on him, and I'm going to cut that down later. And his eyes are going to be half closed for a better reference. So those are Mohican glass eyes, and they're oversized. That's the size for a full snow owl, and I'm going to go ahead and use them. And I think those are $12. They're spherical, and I intend to undercut and put a little bit of that eye up in the back. You can see me trying to undercut that now, and I couldn't really get up in here, and it was a little bit annoying. So this ended up a little bit wider on the top eyelid than I wanted, simply because of the crap in the way and the leverage. You can see how I'm intending to do this, stick that up underneath there. But I'm going to set it with Quickwood, which is a 2-part epoxy. You've seen me set eyes before. If you haven't seen that, this will be your first time, and you should subscribe to the channel. There's lots of good stuff on here if you're trying to figure this out. I share pretty much everything I do, just like Jordy shares. But I'm undercutting those eyes. And speaking of new people, we've got a guy Jordy turned me on to, Uncle Kevin Carves. And he's got a couple. Jordy does a tour of his place, and it's just awesome. So I still got a little more work to do on that eye. So that's Uncle Kevin Carves. He's a chainsaw carver, but he does a little of the other. And then obviously Ryan Cook. You should check Ryan Cook's stuff out. So here's that JB Quickwood. Now, if you go to the store, there'll be several different kinds of this. There's steel and whatnot. 2-part epoxy, they look relatively the same. I only use the Quickwood. It doesn't stick to your fingers. Some of the other stuff, the plumber's epoxy and that sort of stuff, looks like it would work, but it will stick to your fingers and turn them black. So it's 2-part. You can see the 2 colors there. It comes in a nice handy tube, and a tube of that lasts me a couple months. So the eye sockets are just a hair bigger than the eye on that, and then you knead it up. So while we're speaking of people, I already talked about Mike over at Stennis Sticks. You obviously should go check Mike out. He's an awesome artist and does some really fantastic stuff. And then old school, if you're into caricature carving, and the carving master, Gene Messer. That's Gene Messer. So go over and check Gene out. Gene's been doing this for many, many years, and it's just a joy to watch what he's doing. So there's a shout out to Gene and Mike over at Stennis Sticks. So the next thing I do is I put that epoxy in there, and then I'm going to stick the eye in. Now here's something that I've talked about before. You've seen me ruin a knife. There's my old knife. I cut that divot in the back, and that's the very reason for it, is so that I can get pressure and push these eyes in. And when you push them in, if they're tight fit, it pushes the epoxy out, and you're not dealing with lots of epoxy around the edge of it. The epoxy, unless you paint it, is going to show. So I'm trying to get that eye up underneath a little bit, and I couldn't get quite in there, so the next video you will see I will put a little bit of an eyelid over the top of that eye to give him a little bit more of a closed eye character look. But again, the intent on this was to do a baby owl. Their feathers are going to be a little bit blunter. They're not going to be quite filled out. They're going to have a big head compared to an adult, and then just like human babies, and they'll have these big old huge eyes that are disproportionate almost to the rest of the body. That's kind of what I think about babies now. If you're doing a baby anything, I think it helps not to go full character on it, because if you do look up artistry and character building, when people turn these things into characters, they tend to exaggerate everything. Well, a baby animal is going to be exaggerated also, I think, and that's my opinion, of course. So I've got those eyes set in there. I use the blade on this, and you've heard me talk about, I haven't cut myself for a long time. Do you see how I'm pulling the stuff off that knife? I don't typically keep this knife sharp, and I think right there, as I'm pulling that crap off the end of that knife, I sliced that finger. I mean, it wasn't bad enough it didn't really bleed, but it was like a paper cut. So this knife is not completely razor sharp, but it's fairly sharp, and I don't normally keep it sharp because I don't use it. And if you remember, a month or so ago when I started back in this, I didn't have a good knife, and I was playing around with this one to see if I could get it sharp. And I might go ahead and blunt that down, because I typically use this knife when setting the eyes, and I don't use it for carving, especially if I've got another knife. And it's not a bright idea to do what I was just doing there. You keep seeing me pulling that off with my finger. Normally, I'm wearing a ratty pair of jeans, as you can see, and I will normally just wipe that off on my jeans. I mean, if you got a pair of jeans on, why do you need a napkin, right? Now, if you're one of those people that wear white pants or khaki pants, it's probably a good idea to keep your mitts away from those. So there's the eye set. I really do like when I get the eye set. And this is going to be down in there. It looked to me like even though I said he was going to be a big head, looked to me like his head, looking through him, was a little bit too big, and it needed to come down just a hair. So to see that line, and that's a reference line I'm going to work with. So there's that Ram iCube carver again. I'm not digging it real well. The handpiece has a little bit too much vibration for me, although that bit I have in there is a fine cuts all, and it's running nice, but still with a little vibration. The coarse cuts alls, both of them had some vibration issues right out of the box, and I fixed that a little bit by changing the collet in there to a collet that I had in a couple of other hand pieces, and that seemed to help just a little bit. So if you've got a vibration in your handpiece, that may be a collet issue and not necessarily a bit. In this case, the two cuts all bits, not this one. This is the gold one, not the silver. Doesn't have vibration issues, but the two silver ones did. And if I get motivated, they're $15 a pop, so it might be worth writing them and telling them, hey, I got two bad out of your batch, and maybe they'll send me a couple more to replace those. But for $30, even though that's fairly expensive, $15 a bit, I may ignore that. And here's where I was talking about, I thought the nose and the bill and the beak was a little bit too long. So I shortened it just a tad. And again, I'm not really using a reference. At this point, I'm giving up on the reference, and I'm trying to work with what I have in my hand and see if I can get this thing come down. So I know I want those eyes to be a little bit inset, and I want it to be circular on the owl. Like I said, if you go over and check out, Ryan Cook is doing some fantastic chainsaw owls, and one of the things that delineates an owl is the cuts around the eye. So the eyes are going to be a little bit more inset, and they're going to be a circular spherical pattern coming all the way around from the eyes. owls, when you start looking at references, they're really a goofy looking bird. And it's one of those cases where I've talked about before that if you're doing a competition piece that's completely life-size or accurate, anatomically correct, chances are pretty good, at least in my mind, that they won't look right. Because when you see an owl or a picture of an owl, all you're doing is glancing at it briefly, and it registers in your brain as an owl. You've seen Geordie Johnson carving on a piece of cottonwood bark, and you're thinking, and I was thinking in the background, oh man, there's an owl standing on the top of that thing. You see it right there in the corner. And then Geordie, as he's going along, will go, oh my God, there's an owl. There's an owl standing up on the corner of that. So sometimes these pieces tell you, if you're especially doing cottonwood bark, you're doing kind of a freestyle type of thing. So here I'm setting in the claw. Now these owls proportionally have monster feet, and this guy is no different. He's got a monster foot. I'm going to put one foot out where you can see it, and then the other foot will be back behind it, and it's going to be kind of on a rock mass. So there's a chisel, still a little bit dull, although this last week I did order my diamond slicks that'll take care of that. And you can see I'm using the wood, the splitting wood. So if you split firewood, you see how that grain's coming across there? I'm shearing the grain, and it's splitting, just like splitting firewood. And you'll see later on, and then that line in the middle really is a stop cut, so it doesn't allow me to go down beyond that. So if you're new to carving and you're trying to figure out what the heck a stop cut is, that's what that, between the base of that and the body of the owl. I did order a new DeWalt 4.5 inch angle grinder, and in the past typically I would have grabbed that normally off camera with that stump, and I would have made quick work of this thing with a 36 or 24 grit deal. You'll get to see that DeWalt grinder when it comes, and I'll show you how I make it unsafe by taking all the guards off. So here's the tail. Again, I can split that right down. I've got too much wood in there, and you can see that it'll split right along the lines there. Now consequently, if you one of the things you hear people say in carvings, when we had a store over in Cold Springs in New York and I was at West Point, they'd say, is this all carved out of one piece of wood? That was the second question that people would ask. The first one was, what kind of wood is this? And I don't think people really cared. I think it's kind of like, how was the weather out there today? They don't necessarily know what kind of wood you're dealing with, and it's like, oh, basswood, wow. Yeah, it's called linden in Europe, lime in Britain, and it's relatively the same species of trees. But that stuff will split, and they'll say, is this one piece of wood? In a lot of cases, it shouldn't be one piece of wood. It should be several, because the grain should run lengthwise through that piece at its thinnest point. If it doesn't, it'll break. So here's the end of part 2, and this is where we're going. There's part 3. I'm going to show you the face and the finishing. The back of that head is just stone. It is already done, but the feathers are burned in. I've got the claw out there a little bit, and you can see his face is detailed. And this is all going to get painted several coats of white. So stand by for part 3. May have painting in it, may not. Hey, thanks for watching. This has been Ben with Stu on the Lake. Like, comment, subscribe, and check out all those folks that I talked about before.